Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. If you have been watching my channel for a while, or simply are a huge fan of early 90s arcade gaming in general, you'll be aware that there are multiple brilliant beat-em-ups starring Marvel characters that were released in the arcades. In regards to this, we have already looked at Konami's X-Men, Capcom's The Punisher, so today we are going to be looking at Sega's Spider-Man. Just like Konami and Capcom, Sega is certainly an arcade heavyweight developer, so it is going to be interesting to explore how well they handled a great license such as Spider-Man. As we know, Sega today are renowned for many of their fantastic beat-em-ups they would release throughout this era, resulting in both the Golden Axe and Streets of Rage series. So the big question now is this same magic located within this Spider-Man title? Let's find out. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the mad story of Sega's Streets of Rage style Spider-Man video game, and how it measures up to Sega's most beloved IPs. Yeah! But first, a word from our sponsor. Buying razors and shaving equipment from stores can be frustrating, queuing up buying overpriced blades that are often of poor quality that can irritate the skin. Every man deserves quality craftsmanship, simple design, modern convenience and a great shave. Harry's founders, Jeff and Andy, were tired of overpaying for overdesigned razors and realised they weren't alone. Their answer? Start Harry's, raise a bunch of money and buy a razor blade factory in Germany. Nowadays, they help millions of men shave each day in a premium, hassle-free way. So Harry's sent me this impressive starter set that comes with a weighted handle with a textured rubber grip, a 5-blade razor cartridge for precision shaving, shave gel with aloe, and a travel cover to protect my blade on the move, which is ideal for me when travelling the world working on this channel. Harry's provides a high quality product for an insanely good value, with refills starting at only $2. Their blades are now even sharper than ever, and they have not changed their price. We can also take comfort in that their factory in Germany has been manufacturing blades for over 100 years, so they have had plenty of time to produce the most refined, slick and durable products possible, resulting in Harry's guaranteeing a close, comfortable shave. Harry's give 1% of all sales to organisations that promote better mental health care for men and veterans. Harry's are also donating $1 million worth of shaving supplies to hospitals across the US to help support those who need it most right now. Honestly, the deal Harry's currently have on their trial set is amazing. You'll get everything you need for a close, comfortable shave, and you'll be supporting my channel by signing up. Redeem your trial set for just $3 when you go to harrys.com/tophat. So once again, if you want to be as well groomed as this fine specimen, make sure you go to harrys.com/tophat to redeem your offer and join the 10 million people who have tried Harry's. Yeah! Bloody Spider-Man, a superhero so famous that pretty much everyone on the planet knows who he is. The character, created by writer-editor Stan Lee and writer-artist Steve Ditko, first appeared in the anthology comic book Amazing Fantasy issue 15 on August 1962. Whilst we all take the existence of the web slinger for granted today, the emergence of such a character was pretty revolutionary back then. A major factor that made him stand out was his young age. Usually teenage characters were relegated to goofy sidekick roles, but Spider-Man on the other hand was the star of this story. The series broke new ground by featuring Peter Parker as a mere high school student, meaning his self-obsession with rejection, inadequacy and loneliness resulted in young readers being able to easily relate to the character. Peter Parker was the complete opposite of the usual superhero trope, thus meaning he was far away from Superman and later John Cena. Now from here, we all know how successful Spider-Man became, resulting in the character still being a household name even now. This of course meant that with the rise of video games, Spider-Man would always be an ideal character to base various titles around. The first of these came as early as 1982 with a game simply released as Spider-Man on the Atari VCS back in 1982. The simple game, published by Parker Brothers, involves players controlling Spider-Man, scaling a building using his web shooters in order to defuse bombs planted by the green bloody Goblin. It is very simple and rudimentary stuff as you would expect from such basic hardware. The following year would of course result in the North American video game crash, which would apparently result in people in the USA no longer purchasing many video games. Over in Europe, on the other hand, the microcomputer revolution was taking place, meaning that gaming was flourishing, resulting in profits in the region the likes of which had never been seen before. This would result in a whole slew of systems people were gaming on that were far more technically advanced than the basic Atari VCS console, which of course meant there would be multiple Spider-Man games published for the benefit of the strong European market. This would include the release of Quest Probe Spider-Man, developed by Scott Adams and released in 1984 across various micros, a graphical adventure video game where Spider-Man encounters the Lizard and other enemies. Next, for home computers, the world would get The Amazing Spider-Man and Captain America in Doctor Doom's Revenge, a side-scrolling video game starring Marvel Comics superheroes Spider-Man and Captain America battling a host of supervillains led by Doctor Doom himself. The basic game involves players alternating controlling Spider-Man and Captain America, but does not really offer much reason to be played now. Moving into 1990, development of new Spider-Man games would remain in Europe, or the UK more specifically, with a range of games being released all known as The Amazing Spider-Man for home computer formats. Oxford Digital Enterprises would be tasked with the challenge, resulting in action puzzle platformer video games featuring the menace to society. British company Rare would also program a game known as The Amazing Spider-Man, which was published internationally under the Acclaim LJN brand. Unlike the home computer games, this one is more of a side-scrolling platform action video game, rather than a game that features many puzzles. The next Spider-Man release would be the game I personally had during my childhood, which, like the 1982 Atari game, was also simply known as Spider-Man. The original version of the title was developed for the Sega Mega Drive by Technopop, but would also be ported by Sega internally to their Master System, Mega CD and Game Gear platforms. I myself in my youth owned the Game Gear version. The original Mega Drive version of this side-scrolling platform game, whereby the player controls superhero Spider-Man to battle various supervillains, ended up being a hugely popular game. In fact, it is said that the Spider-Man brand was helpful in establishing the success of the 16-bit Mega Drive in the first place. As we have to remember, this was a time before Nintendo home consoles had allowed players to play as the web slinger. Maybe I'll consider doing a deep dive on this one in the future. These Spider-Man home consoles games would just be the beginning of the Sega Spider-Man story though, as 1991 would see the first Spider-Man game developed by Sega themselves released in arcades. As mentioned at the start of this video, this one was a traditional arcade beat-em-up. It is of note that the game was released in a year that Sega were busy creating games in this genre. This was the same year that both Streets of Rage and Golden Axe 2 saw release on the Mega Drive, two games that would aid the platform in developing the reputation the hardware would later earn. They were both notable for offering players at home cooperative beat-em-up play, something of which by this point in time the Super Nintendo had failed to offer. Games in the arcade, however, were technically above what could be experienced at home, so the following year of 1992 would see the fantastic 4-player Golden Axe The Revenge of Death Adder released on Sega's 32-bit Sega System 32 board. But prior to this marvellousness, the Sega System 32 would also offer Spider-Man the video game, an earlier 4-player beat-em-up that ran on the hardware that came out the same year as, of course, Streets of Rage. As you can see just by glancing at this game, it is graphically more impressive than any of the Mega Drive beat-em-ups that existed in 1991. But what else does this game offer? Let's discuss. This video game allows the user to play as one of 4 heroes, Spider-Man, Black Cat, Submariner and Hawkeye, a selection who many 90s Spider-Man fans may not necessarily associate so heavily with the brand. But you have to remember that this game came out 3 years before the extremely popular Spider-Man animated TV series on the Fox Kids network, which I personally do not recall seeing Submariner or Hawkeye involved in. And I watched every single bloody episode multiple times. In regards to the link between these heroes, it appears that Marvel started publishing a series known as Marvel Team-Ups in 1972. Which obviously revolved around 2 of their heroes teaming. There were 150 of these comic books published, and Spider-Man was featured as one of the 2 heroes in all but 10 of these issues, thus meaning he had a history of teaming with all these characters prior to the release of the game. These 4 heroes each have unique movesets and abilities, which obviously can be used to pound on enemies. In addition to this, they all have the ability to jump and perform the same basic attack, with each function being mapped to the cabinet's 2 button layouts. When it comes to Spider-Man himself, as one would expect, his unique abilities revolve around his web-based powers, allowing him to swing from webs and shoot web blasts. Black Cat is athletic and acrobatic, and comes with the ability to use her claws, grappling hook and cable to defeat enemies. Hawkeye obviously uses a bow and arrow as a weapon of choice, which he can use in a number of ways to defeat opponents, and fricking Submariner uses water-based projectile attacks. The plot of the game is as simple as it comes, and Spider-Man and his allies must retrieve an artifact from the Kingpin. After inserting a coin into the cabinet, then selecting your character or characters, action starts on the streets of Queens. The game is divided into chapters, the first of which sees the heroes pursuing Scorpion. As you can see, the brawling in this game is fluid and the graphics and animation fit the comic book theme of the game extremely well. The artwork featured in this one certainly gives the title a completely different look to the likes of Golden Axe and even Streets of Rage to some degree. As players brawl down this run-down street and have defeated multiple variants of different enemy sprites, players must end up fighting in front of a lorry. The shutter on the side of the vehicle slowly comes down, revealing a man resting inside some sort of mechanical contraption. During this portion of the game, players face off with Scorpion, but unfortunately after some brawling he manages to escape. In his absence, the contraption opens up, revealing Venom, a Spider-Man villain who functions as a boss of this area. Being an early boss, he does not prove too much hassle, but defeating him results in an interesting event. He uses what appears to be an artifact which allows him to grow in size. This leads to an interesting graphical effect where the camera zooms out, making the player sprites much smaller on the screen. This change results in the game's mechanics completely changing from a multi-plane scrolling beat-em-up to a single-plane beat-em-up with platforming elements. I guess that this mechanic in many ways makes a lot of sense though, because if you watch or read anything Spider-Man related, it's as much about climbing tall buildings as it is about fighting, so this play is more in line with the 1982 original game. On this stage, as players ascend the building, they must defeat this larger form of Venom in an almost King Kong-like encounter. After Venom's defeat, the heroes grab onto a helicopter, carrying them to the top of the building. Upon landing on the building's roof, we once again see this cool zoom-in effect, this time zooming inwards, allowing for beat-em-up action with the larger sprites to return to the fold. After pounding through a ridiculous amount of enemy sprites, we find Venom laying motionless on the stage once again. The Kingpin is with him, who informs the player that it seems the effects of the Sorcerer's Stone have worn off, leading to another fight with Venom, this time once again in his small form. His defeat this third time around though finally brings an end to this opening long stage. Unlike the last stage where we encountered Scorpion at the beginning, in the second stage the Green Goblin taunts the player before zooming off. The second stage presents more of an industrial setting that in some ways looks similar to artwork found in Comic Zone. Further in though, you will notice the ground start moving below the hero's feet, and the second layer in the background scrolling. That is because all of the brawling is taking place at present aboard a Zeppelin. Soon players encounter Dr. Connors, who, as you would expect in a Spider-Man game, transforms into the Lizard, so that the next boss encounter can take place. Following the theme of Stage 1, defeating this boss in the middle of the stage results in a change in play perspective once more, to the platforming part of the level. This part is even more platformy than what could be found in Stage 1, with many unstable platforms that collapse the moment a character steps on them. There are also enemies that shoot projectiles here, mixing the gameplay up further. Players must also defeat Electro here, who has the power to zap his foes. Players continue to climb up the Zeppelin until they are inside its interior, where traditional beat-em-up action eventually resumes. We also have explodable barrels here, which I guess is as beat-em-up as things get. Action eventually progresses until brawling seems to be occurring on a moving jet-powered platform where a boss fight commences against the Green Goblin. Whilst this fight occurs, we can see the Zeppelin we were just riding hurtling towards the ground, ready to meet its fate at the hands of the Goblin. After eventually depleting his lifeline, he then builds his hoverboard, which instantaneously leads to him receiving a new life bar so that he can be taken on in a tougher fight. Once the battle has been won against this projectile fighting form, he is given a third life bar, where players must defeat him on the ground once again, finally bringing Chapter 2 to a close. Chapter 3 sees the characters head into the lair of the Kingpin, which at first looks strikingly like a casino. Players must brawl their way through waves of various stereotypical mobsters, before heading into a more boiler room-like area for more fun. In here, players finally face off with Scorpion, who was first encountered at the beginning of Stage 1. Defeating him introduces Chapter 3's platforming section, which to me kind of looks like a Mega Man stage. The platforming area also has bars to hold onto at the top of the ceiling, so that players can traverse the stage in an almost Strider-like manner. There are more traps and obstacles as the area progresses until players must fight Dr. Octopus, who obviously has the ability to attack the player with his many robotic arms. The heroes must then hurry through a section destroying lasers whilst being careful not to be crushed before finally arriving in the Kingpin's office. The crime lord angrily smashes the desk in front of the player before unleashing hordes of his goons against the heroes. Eventually players get to brawl with the Kingpin for a little bit, but if you survive his mean barge attacks, he gets away, leaving the fighters with a confrontation against the Sandman. If you're familiar with this baddie, he is Anakin Skywalker's worst nightmare, as he has the ability to turn into sand. This boss is of course rough, irritating, and he certainly gets everywhere. When he is defeated, the game introduces a vertically scrolling section involving climbing up the side of the Kingpin's skyscraper before finally boarding a helicopter. Once in the air, players must take on the Hobgoblin in a fight quite different to the Green Goblin encounter, as this one is from a zoomed out perspective. After the Goblin's defeat, players finally earn their opportunity to defeat the Kingpin once and for all, who up until this point has functioned as the game's main antagonist. Knocking him out leads to a hologram of Dr. Doom appearing in the sky, revealing him as the next adversary players must work towards taking out. Next we move into the game's final chapter, which is known as Doomsday. Here players begin brawling through a cave, taking on ape-like opponents in a pretty standard cave setting. Eventually though, the heat is turned up when a fire is started, adding a little more tension to the gameplay. The next fight against a notable opponent takes place against the Lizard, a boss we took out earlier on stage 2. We next have a platforming section involving players climbing down the side of a mountain before entering Dr. Doom's castle. Once inside, this is what you would expect really, lots of enemies to take out and further bosses resurfacing, with Green Goblin up next. This is certainly the longest chapter in the game. In terms of returning enemies, next up we must fight Anakin's worst nightmare once more, before reaching a medieval themed room where players get to take on Dr. Doom himself. This encounter is a long one, but when he is finally defeated, he explodes, leaving a pile of rubble in his wake. This leaves us questioning whether this was even the real Dr. Doom. The game then goes all platformy again and begins to look strikingly like Castlevania, with plenty of stairs to ascend and medieval statues, archways and bridges to set the scene. We then have a classic beat 'em up lift section where players face off with Dr. Doom once more, this time riding an annoying mechanical spinning disc. After completing this section, he warns the player that he is going to teach them to learn what it means to face true power, resulting in players facing off against him in a traditional brawling section once again. After we see this Dr. Doom explode for good this time, we have one final challenge. Venom manifesting countless times over, meaning tons of replicas of him must be defeated to finally complete this game. After this grueling encounter, the game is finally over. We touched on Castlevania earlier, but hilariously the game even ends exactly like a Vania game too, with the heroes watching on as Doom's castle crumbles in the background. The in-game text even tells the player that Dr. Doom has been defeated, but in your heart you know you need to be ready because one day he will return. This is proper Dracula of Beaumont stuff. All jokes aside though, reflecting on the entire experience that Spider-Man the video game delivers, it is a pretty fantastic game that is decent enough to stand out from the many beat-em-ups that were developed and published in the early 90s. The platforming and sprite scaling in this game results in this one delivering a vastly different experience to Golden Axe 2 and Streets of Rage, despite all three games being developed by Sega in the exact same year. And that is without even needing to mention that this one features 4-player functionality, which is an upgrade from its console cousin counterparts. I think this is a really cool game which certainly does not get talked about much, which I guess is quite common when it comes to arcade exclusives anyway. I guess if you are not into emulation, or happen to play this one on an actual arcade cabinet, it simply would have passed you by now. But after learning more about this game, as far as Sega beat-em-ups go, this is one of the greats, and deserves to be treated as such. It is also worth noting, I guess, how close this game was in attempting to imitate the source material, in that it offers plenty of fighting, but also various web slinging and climbing sections too. It feels like a Spider-Man game. which is emphasised even further by the array of classic villains who appear in this game along the way. It seems that I am not alone in appreciating this game though, as in Japan, Spider-Man the video game was among the more successful table arcade units in 1991. Dragon Magazine in 1992 would give this title a 5 out of 5 stars for its quality, and Sinclair User gave it the shared award for games most likely to save the universe and one of the best superhero games ever made. The January 1992 issue of Computer and Video Games gave it a positive review as well, praising the 4-player gameplay, the incredible graphics with huge beautifully animated sprites, and an impressive zoom in zoom out effect. Everybody loved this game. Retrospectively, I feel that if there had have been a way to get this one home in 1991 or 1992, it would be just as remembered and respected as the likes of Golden Axe and Streets of Rage. So it's a shame really that there are so many people out there who have still never really played this one. So I guess that's it really. Spider-Man is yet another fantastic beat 'em up from Sega that quality wise, in my opinion, stands toe to toe with some of the best. I have said all I have to say on the matter, so now I would be curious to hear your thoughts down below with regards to what you think of this Streets of Rage and Golden Axe style title. If you're new here, I would adore it if you could like, subscribe and hit that notification bell to receive new videos covering various beat 'em ups of our past every single week. I have a plethora of videos on the subject for you to go back and enjoy. Today's video was partially possible due to the funding that channel backers provide me with over on Patreon, who allow me to work on these videos on a full-time basis. So, if you would like a credit at the end of these videos, early access to content before everyone else, the opportunity to pick future video topics and more, then why not consider becoming a backer too? In regards to these people, special thank yous go out to Sebastian Velez, Carl Johnson, The Murder of Crows, Heyo Paulo Lopez, Joseph Rasmick, Doug Perkins, Corey I. Marsh Sr., Luke Johnson, BXL Gotham, Ryan Dinch, Evan Balder, Philip Matt, Camber Rambo 82, Adra Warakai, Keith Ferguson, Dropin Varela, Prince Knight, Mark Cullix, Ago, Jordan Durant, TOG Driver, Angel 85, Alethea Swanson, Timothy W. Haskins II, Nick Daniels, Prince Asana, Carlos Domingos, Glenny Glenn, Daniel Daly, Computer Man, House of the Ted, Sponge Matt B, Gary Pinkett, ECU Professor, Tony Tran, Aaron McNamara, Instant Gratification Monkey, Man Shovel, James Bishop, JB, Post DXL, Michael Hall, Wesley Sangheed, Ted Stickles, Langston Miller, Noob, Brian Barry, Sir Lagney, Stephen Lewis, Sarah Powell, Vlamic Renee, Sarai, H. Al Sarai, Marvin Araliga, Chris Cole, Adrian Hannington, Bernard NG, Richard Stewart, James McDonald, Crazy Yell, Dan Van Dammit, Adam Castin, Lewis Viant, John Bates, David Bowell, Chris Fisk, Paul Elliott, Mean Machine Dean, Mike Bruno, Rick67, Antonio Rodriguez, Hans Christian, Craig Jenkins, Tom Elliott, Retroverse.com, Casey Wright, Synth Spaces, Zai, Andrew Bazansky, and all of my other patrons. You certainly make what I do a whole lot easier, and I bloody love my job. Thank you so much.